Welcome friends, welcome back to the hangar. Today we're going to talk about cameras. So over the last 3 or 4 videos and probably the last dozen flights I've done in Mike Victor uniform, I have been testing cameras. And I've been putting little letters up when I've been showing you which camera it is that you're looking at. And I've had a lot of really great comments, a lot of people saying interesting things about which camera they think is good and which camera they don't think is very good. And I've got some very definite ideas on which ones are good and which ones aren't. Some of that has to do with the picture, and some of that has to do whether the camera is at all reliable. And some of these cameras aren't reliable at all, and some of them have horrible pictures. So let me pull out the cameras and we'll get into it. Okay, so these are the cameras that I was using, and let me see if I can assemble them in some sort of way that makes sense. Probably the first thing that people are going to ask is, what qualifies me to do a camera review? 30 years of working in the film business in Toronto. Started at the bottom as a production assistant, worked my way up, worked every on-set job as a production assistant, grip, electric. I worked in the camera department. I became a director of photography in my own right on side projects. And in the commercial world or the professional filmmaking world, I moved on to being a line producer and then head of production at one of the production companies while still maintaining a presence outside of that world, doing documentaries and television commercials and music videos. And I have been around cameras my entire life. I got my first stills photography camera when I was in grade 5, and I had a darkroom set up, and I always worked in the photography business, moved into motion, and as I'm winding down my career, I started to play on YouTube. But I've always sort of thought of YouTube as a bit of fun. YouTube has never been something where I wanted to excel as a filmmaker, because that seems like work to me. But I'm still striving to find the best camera to use, or the best camera system to use in Mike Victor uniform. And all through my career, I've been camera agnostic. I have shot on Aries, I've shot on movie cams, I've shot on all kinds of different film cameras, Panavision, Aton. I've had Super 8, 16, Super 16, 35 millimeter film cameras that I've worked with across the board. Moved into digital, and I've worked with everything from Panasonics to Sonys to Reds to Aries again. And I own Aries systems and I own Red systems that I own and use in my own production company to shoot professionally. Camera agnostic, best tool for the job. I did a job on Mount Everest, and the camera I took to that was a Panasonic HVX200, the P2 system, because that was the right camera for the job. It was a broadcast job. It was a television commercial to be shown during the Beijing Olympics. So we needed quality, but we also needed something that we could cart to Mount Everest that I could still, hang off a rock face and film with. So I know a little bit about cameras. And I have used crash cams or action cams in a lot of different jobs. And I've always been disappointed by them. I have always been disappointed by them. And so this is no different. I have been disappointed by every camera on this table, and it comes down to picking the best of a bad bunch. So we're going to start out with the worst, the absolute worst. And that is this one, the Drift Ghost 4K something or other. I'm not even going to go into what it's called too closely. It showed up as camera E in one of the videos. I was really excited because it has a great form factor. It is a camera that I think would be fantastic hanging off a wing or inside the cabin, small, unobtrusive, has really good battery life. It's an internal battery only, but the battery life was amazing, lasted for a very long time. But the picture was horrible. I don't even want to get to the picture because there was so much jello from the vibration of the wing or the plane itself that I didn't even really get to critically look at the picture because you couldn't see it. So that one is horrible. Drift Ghost 4K something or other, gone. Out of the running. I only showed it once on one of the videos. Then we come back. So I'm going to go from worst to better. I'm going to say the next worst camera is this one, the Insta360 X3. And what I thought about this was it had low resolution, even though it shoots in 5.7K, that's 5.7K in a 360-degree radius. When you actually start to cut it down to do a 16:9 frame to stick in the video, you only get 1080. Which if everything else was 1080, you wouldn't notice a difference, but it's not great. It's distorted, low resolution, low definition, extra step in post because you have to, bring it into their proprietary software and then export it before you can bring it into any other system. The picture is warped, has its place, definitely gives some cool perspectives and some cool shots. It is a camera that you will see occasionally strapped to the wing. I will use it again and again, but it will not be a primary camera. This is not a primary camera or primary camera system. So that kind of sits over here. Good to have, interesting shots, but not something I'll use very often. Brings us to the Insta360 RS1. This was camera C in all of the shots or all of the videos. Lacks definition, low detail, false artificial sharpening around everything to try to bring back some sharpness, but if the detail's not there, there's no way for the sharpening. Definitely overheats in a couple of positions on the airplane. This was probably the camera that overheated the most. In terms of dynamic range, I think this was pretty low. The highlights would be blown out while the shadows would be filled with noise, even in the same shot. And I understand, this is very difficult shooting. You're not able to light or block anything off. The airplane's pointing into the sun, the airplane's pointing away from the sun. There could be clouds, it could be clouds and sun interspersed very quickly. So it's a very tough environment for any of these cameras to get right. In a well-lit situation, this camera would be fine. But as soon as you put in a lot of light and shadow in the same scene, it falls apart. It just doesn't work. But in a decent lighting situation, the picture's not bad. The stabilization is relatively okay. But for me, not a camera that I would invest an entire system to use. It just doesn't work. So that brings us to the DJI Osmo Action 3. And I had high hopes for this. I thought this could be the one. I thought this could be the camera that really worked. First thing first, I'm not a huge fan of this magnetic locking thing on the bottom, especially when you're hanging it on a wing. You're flying at 9,500 feet, 120 miles an hour, and this is held on with a magnet. Didn't excite me. Overall, the picture was okay, just okay. Again, in a well-lit, properly lit situation without a lot of difference between your highlights and your lowlights, this camera fares reasonably okay. Problem is, even at the lowest sharpening setting, it's over sharpened. It does lack some definition, lacks some dynamic range. I don't think that the focus distance that's given for close focus is actually true. A lot of the shots where I had this on the panel facing me, things looked out of focus to me, like I was just too close, or the camera was just too close. The shadows are really noisy. So there's one flight, I'll put that up. It was overcast 11,000 feet. We had a solid overcast layer, both into and away from the sun. I flew north and then I flew again south. It just didn't handle that low light situation. And I wouldn't call that a low light situation at all. We were outside in the sunshine, even though we had that overcast layer. It should have been a beautiful day to shoot because the lighting was very even. It just didn't hold up. So it was very noisy on an overcast day. The last thing that I wanted to say about this one, it never overheated. Never shut down. There was no glitches in the firmware, no glitches in the software. The Insta360, both Insta360's camera, they shut down at certain points because of glitches in the firmware. this never shut down. It was a rock solid camera. If they could get the picture better, if they could get a better sensor in here, if they could get better low light or a higher dynamic range, this would have been the winner. But as it is, it's sort of relegated to backup. Which brings us to the GoPros. If there's a camera system that I have loved to hate over my years in film, it has been, since the introduction of the GoPro, the GoPro. There have been a lot of jobs where people have come to me and said, oh, we need to put a crash cam here, we need to put a crash cam there. And I've always pushed for a more expensive option to get a better picture. I've always pushed for a more expensive option to give us something that would be more reliable. GoPros are notoriously not very reliable. So I have the 9, the 10, the 11, and the 11 mini. And so, camera A throughout this series has been the GoPro Hero 10. Top of the top thing that I want to say about GoPro is that by their own admission, like 90% of all of the shots done with a GoPro are under 2 minutes. This is a camera designed for under 2 minutes of shooting at any given time. They don't look at it as a camera that's going to shoot continuously for 3 or 4 hours, like I'm trying to get it to do here, where I want to turn it on, fly, not think about it. And that's a big thing. Task saturation when flying an airplane. I don't want to be looking at my phone at an app to see if all the cameras are running and try to restart them. And in some cases, in all of the cases for these cameras, Wi-Fi or wireless connectivity while flying is almost non-existent or very unreliable. An aluminum-bodied aircraft, lots of electrical noise coming from the engine, the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth just don't work. So the GoPro 10, very buggy firmware. Of the GoPros on this countertop, the 10 I will not be using. The latest firmware is really buggy. Yes, they overheat and they shut down. Great, they overheat and they shut down. Let's leave that over there. They also shut down for all kinds of other reasons. And I've played with the settings, trying to get something where the camera wouldn't, just shut down. And I can't seem to find that sweet spot of having stuff that they tell you are features turned on and stuff turned off. I've played with all kinds of different speeds and brands of memory card. They still shut down. They still glitch. The Hero 10 is notorious for me. You turn it on, you press record, and it shows that it's recording. The tally lights are all flashing. All the red tally lights are flashing. It shows on the back screen that it's recording and it's counting up the recording. But when you go to turn it off, you can't turn it off. You can't stop recording. You can't turn the camera off. The only way to stop it is to pull the battery. And then you find out that it didn't record anything. You pressed go, it showed that it was recording, and it had just glitched and stopped. Very annoying. So the GoPro Hero 10, decent picture, but it's totally, completely, 100% unreliable for anything other than maybe a handheld shot. Do a handheld shot, talk to the camera where you can monitor it. But out on the wing or inside the cabin, a no-go. GoPro Hero 10, forget about it. Brings us to the GoPro Hero 11, which is the newest one. Best picture of the bunch. GoPro Hero 11, either one of these, best picture of the bunch. Best image stabilization of the bunch. Best color, best definition. You could manage the sharpening so that it wasn't over-sharpened. Both of these, best cameras. But the firmware is still a little buggy. The firmware is definitely still a little buggy. They still shut down. Nothing to do with overheating. They still shut down. So out on the wing, there's no way that these cameras are overheating. You're going, 90 to 120 miles an hour at 12 degrees Celsius, powering them off an external brick, no internal battery. They're not overheating. They're just glitchy. The firmware's still glitchy. But the latest firmware that I just put on these last night, I haven't flown with it yet, but, as a little bit of testing just to see they don't shut down. So maybe with the new firmware, these will be better. They do both overheat. The Mini overheats pretty badly, even though they've taken away the screens and put a heatsink on the back. Definitely overheats almost worse than the full size. And I have to think that's because even though they took away some of the electronics and they took away the screens, which generate heat, they then jammed everything closer together. And even though it's got this heat sink on the back, there isn't a lot of airflow through the fins. But I think with a fan, this would work well on the glare shield. But it doesn't have a front tally light. There's no screen on the front and there's no tally light on the front, so you don't know if it's working, which defeats the purpose of talking to the camera if you don't know that it's on. If you have to, every time you want to talk to it, you have to move it, look behind to see if the tally lights, and then reposition it. Again, task saturation in the airplane. You have to be able to start the airplane. You have to be able to start the cameras, forget about them. Go into your checklist for the airplane, fly the airplane, land, and then turn the cameras off. You can't be thinking about fussing with your cameras during flight. Which brings us to the winner. The GoPro Hero 9. 2 iterations ago, an older sensor, an older processor. The picture isn't quite as good. The stabilization isn't quite as good as the 10 and 11. But performance-wise, rock solid camera. Never shut down. Didn't overheat. The picture might not be as good, but does the picture really matter? It does. But you can have a great picture, and if the camera shuts down and you don't get the shot, then it's useless. Totally useless to me. The 9 is the way for me to go. So luckily I have a bunch of 9s, and we'll probably use those exclusively going forward, still testing the 11s to see if the firmware catches up. But one of the things that really bothers me is coming from the world of commercial cinematography, where the cameras are rock solid, where things, you know, with the exception of Red, who releases beta software. They tell you don't use beta software on a job because it's beta software, but they will release beta software so that you can test it. You look at Arri, those are rock solid cameras. They turn on, they work. You can guarantee that they're going to work. And they're not about releasing a new camera every year with something new. Like these are consumer cameras. They've always got to have something new. And I think they've tried to jam too much, or GoPro's tried to jam too much into this package for the sake of having something new, rather than making sure they've got a rock solid camera. Let's have something new. Let's get it out to all the YouTube filmmakers. They can talk about it and we'll sell millions of cameras. Who cares if they work? I kind of care that they work, so I'm going to use the 9. Now a little bit more about how I'm using these. No battery inside, powering them from these cinema bricks or these smaller V-Lock bricks. Those are inside the wing, running cable out to power them. And then I'm using dual system sound. So I've got these tentacle sync boxes, recorders inside the cabin that are recording the sound. And with these cameras, with the GoPros, I can jam sync time code from the tentacle sync using a QR code. You hold the QR code to the camera, jams the time code to the camera in lockstep with the voice recorder or the audio recorder. And then when you bring it into post, it's really easy to slide everything together. Not possible with the Osmo Action, not possible with the Insta360 cameras, definitely not possible with the Ghost Drift. And so that sort of makes even as much as I don't like GoPro, that makes the GoPro a winner. The other thing is the Insta360 cameras. This gets weird. The Insta360 cameras, when you set them to 24 frames a second, they're actually filming at 24 frames a second. When you set the GoPro and the Osmo Action 3 to 24 frames a second, they're actually filming at 23.976. And to me, I don't understand why they're filming at 23.976 anymore, or 23.98, which is kind of what most people will say. There's no need for 23.976 at all anymore with digital broadcast, since most of this footage is going to YouTube anyway, and since most people are probably going to film at 30 or 60 anyway, there's no need for 23.976. Just make it film 24. So, in conclusion, GoPro Hero 9 is the winner. I will be using those going forward, testing the 11s, probably using the 10s in places that aren't critical for handheld shots. The Osmo Action 3 and the Insta360 cameras going to go in the bottom of the drawer. the Ghost Drift 9 or what 4K or whatever it's called will be forgotten about at the end of this video. And like I said before, I will take a hit on picture quality for reliability. I will take a hit on picture quality to tell the story. I will take a hit on picture quality to make sure that something gets on the screen. There is no perfect camera. I'd love to tell the guy over Camera Conspiracies. I mean, he's here in Toronto. There is no perfect camera you're going to look for a very long time. There's a perfect camera for the job. If I could put hairy Alexa minis and maybe red Komodos on the outside of this airplane, I would film with those. But it defeats the purpose of simplicity. All of these cameras have to be simple to use. They have to just work. They have to work in the background. They can't interfere with me flying the aircraft. And I think that's probably one of the most important things. Telling the story, filming the flight is always at the bottom of my list when flying this airplane. So come on back and we'll take a flight in Mike Victor uniform. We'll go out and we'll fly around, and you'll hear me grumble about these cameras over and over and over probably when I don't get the shot, or you'll maybe see that there's stuff missing in the video because I didn't get the shot because the camera shut off. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening to me ramble for 10 or 15 minutes about cameras. And we'll see you again soon.